George Washington took the oath of office to be the first president of the United States in New York City and lived on Broadway. In fact, New York was the first capital of the United States until Federal City was built, later called Washington, D.C. George Washington's inaugural address was comprised of 60 pages of handwritten speech. On the last page of his speech, he had what I feel is somewhat of a prediction for America. And I want to share that with you on today's Prophecy in the News. Recently, the last page of his speech was found in London and sold at auction for $306,000. In his last page of his inaugural speech, George Washington made the statement that America would become a great power and would never again submit to foreign rule until, listen to this, until the people of America shall have lost all virtue, until they shall have become totally insensible to the difference between freedom and slavery, until they shall have been reduced to such poverty of spirit as to be willing to sell that preeminent blessing, the birthright of a free man, for a mess of pottage. In short, until they have been found incapable of governing themselves and ripe for a master. Gary Stearman is here to discuss with me the prediction of George Washington.
You know, J.R., George Washington is historically portrayed as a godly man. He knew the Bible, read the Bible. He was aware of the history of the world, the history of Israel, for example. He knew about Rome, the Roman masters. He knew what would happen to a society when it forgot God. And I think the message we get from the last page of Washington's speech is that he was fully aware that America had to remain founded on spiritual principles or else suffer collapse and fall. And the question we're asking today, have we arrived at that time George Washington was talking about on the last page of his speech?
We may be on the last page of history, in fact. This speech by George Washington, though it was somewhat of a prediction, has become more of a prophecy being fulfilled before our very eyes in this generation. Now, Gary, you once made the statement that speeches and our writing comes from the spirit, not from the mind of man, but actually from the spirit of man. So it is possible that there was some kind of divine intervention here to put into the mind of George Washington to make this statement, perhaps because he was the first president of the United States.
Well, you know, it's clear that he was raised up by God as a leader of this infant nation. But more than that, I believe that his thoughts were governed in a godly way, which means that the Spirit of the Lord implanted ideas, thoughts, purposes in his mind. And J.R., there's a general principle that comes to us all the way from ancient history. The philosophers of old, the sages of old, all believed that a man's thoughts came not from man himself, but either from dark forces or from the forces of God. In other words, you're a servant either to God or to Satan. And your formative, creative thoughts really arise not from yourself, but from a higher level, a spiritual level. Clearly, the thoughts of George Washington were motivated from a higher spiritual level, that is, from God himself.
George Washington made basically 4 statements here. I'd like for us to review them and to see if they are being fulfilled in our day. The first one he said is that America would never lose its freedom until the people of America shall have lost all virtue. Gary, I am convinced this part of his prediction is being fulfilled in our generation. 1 out of every 3 births in America are illegitimate births today. Incredible.
That's right. We have single-parent marriages, so-called, or single-parent households proliferating at a rate that makes them almost beyond counting. I mean, it just seems like each quarterly period, the statistics reflect a rise in the single-parent household. Usually it's a mother and child or children, and usually those children are illegitimate. J.R., this is the death knell of any nation, and this is clearly reflective of a loss of virtue.
Plus, among young people today and teenagers, live in without the benefit of marriage is commonplace. It's commonplace. Americans have lost their virtue. Our nation has lost its virtue. George Washington was right.
You know, there was an advertisement just recently in Palm Springs, California, where they have a local, I guess it's a AAA professional ball team, and the owner got a brilliant promotional idea. He was going to have nude night, so he advertised anyone who wishes to come to the ballpark nude may do so, and they will have a special section for you. He was so overrun by people responding favorably to his advertising that he canceled the project. He said he would be overrun because we just don't have facilities enough to handle all the people who wanted to do it. That's a loss of virtue.
That's incredible. And then people like Disney celebrating sodomy and making pornographic movies.
Right.
Where has America gone? Into the gutter of society. I mean, our virtue is gone. It's incredible. Ethics are declining today, Gary. Ethics, what is that word? It's a word never used anymore. Nobody knows what it means anymore. No honesty in business or in politics or even in education.
Yeah, it's given lip service in our schools. We're supposed to be good, moral young ladies and gentlemen. However, when it comes down to actualities, right and wrong is not taught in public school anymore. It's too controversial. Morality, they say, is really based upon religion, and we can't have religion in public schools, and we certainly can't pray. And the foundation of ethics is morality. The foundation of morality is spiritual life with God. All of that's been cut out of the public education system. So combined with single-parent households, some have said that we are now giving rise to fostering the rise of what's called the super predator generation. Young people growing up with the idea that everything they see is theirs for the taking.
The second thing George Washington said was, until they shall have become totally insensible to the difference between freedom and slavery. Nobody understands the word republic anymore.
It's true.
Mob rule, this democracy that we've been taught since childhood throughout this generation is not what America's all about. America was supposed to be a republic, a land ruled by law, not by
the
public
mob.
Sentiment or the mob or the politically correct.
Actually, politics in America, and in fact I think we can say this is true globally, have degenerated to the emotional level. Mob rule, we have in effect substituted a kind of minority rule in our political structure. That is, minorities are given more weight than the majority, hopefully to achieve some kind of fairness and balance. But certainly representative democracy, as it came up under the founding fathers, George Washington and others, has been lost for all practical purposes.
Our cities are in such tragic shape. Washington, D.C. itself is no longer called the District of Columbia. Well, of course it is District of Columbia, but Time magazine has called it the District of Calamity.
That's right. Here in the April 29th, 1996 Time magazine, it's called the District of Calamity. All the infrastructures are failing. Washington now has a $379 million municipal budget deficit. Fire engines are breaking down on the way to fires. The city has just recently closed down 3 of its fire stations, and some of the remaining ones are scheduled to be closed. Police officers have to pay for the maintenance on their own cars, and some of them work on their cars at night to keep them running. Recently, 1,500 traffic signals all quit in Washington. You know why? The city didn't pay the electric bill. Didn't have the money. Streets are full of holes. Crime is beyond reckoning, beyond counting. They only check out the most vile and violent crimes. The others, they just let go now. This is Washington, D.C., named after George Washington.
George Washington would turn over in his grave if he could see what's going on in the city of his namesake today. His prediction was apparently a prophecy. It has come true. Until the people of America shall have lost all virtue, until they shall have become totally insensible to the difference between freedom and slavery. You know, we talk about our troops going to promote freedom across the world. And in the recent bombing in Saudi Arabia, Gary, one of the political pundits said, it's not freedom they're here for, but oil. To me, it's interesting that George Washington's inaugural speech was sold at auction, at least the last page of it, in London recently. It was found in an album hidden under a sofa in the estate of a man who had died, and when the people came in to appraise his estate, they found this sheet of paper written in the hand of George Washington himself, the first president of the United States. And what he had to say on that last page of his speech is really prophetic. Oh, it may have been just a prediction back then, but it's turned out to have been prophetic because we live in the day of the fulfillment of the statements made by George Washington. He said that America would become a great nation, and it has, a great power. And that the people would never again be ruled by foreign rule, such as maybe the United Nations, you know. Until that day when, first of all, the people of America shall have lost all virtue, and second, until they shall have been totally insensible to the difference between freedom and slavery, no longer understand what it means to be free. Willing to, as he said, thirdly, to sell their birthright. This is the way he put it. Until they shall have been reduced to such poverty of spirit as to be willing to sell that preeminent blessing, the birthright of a free man, for a mess of pottage. Now, Gary, let's talk first about poverty of spirit. We have seen literally a drought of spiritual values across America.
We have, and furthermore, the church, the preeminent institution in the United States of America, the Christian church, the beautiful image of a white clapboard church on a hill with a beautiful steeple pointing toward heaven, you know, that used to be the symbol of everything good and right in America, is now being shown on television in flames because they're being torched all over this country. People no longer respect the institution.
And our government, of course, is using the news of black churches being torched as a political football. Using it to try to get reelected in this presidential campaign. And to me, that's just about as low down as you can get, because I want you to know, even though some 32 or 33 black churches have been torched, the total number are over 90 churches across America, and most of them white churches.
And J.R.,
that's not told on the news, you see.
That's not
using
told.
this for political gain.
It misses the major point. It's not the fact that black churches are being burned, it's the fact that churches are being burned. And J.R., can we expect anything different? Look the way the church and the man of the cloth has been portrayed on in the
Christian
movies.
bashing, the latest American sport.
Sure. Look at the movies. They always portray a preacher as a man who's neurotic, if not outright psychotic, or he's out to make money and that's it. He's a man devoid of morality, ethics. And after years of this kind of pummeling, it's no wonder people are starting to burn churches.
It's an incredible thing. The people have been reduced to such poverty of spirit as to be willing to sell that birthright. And you know, Gary, this Christian bashing had to come about in order for people to lose their inner values so that they'd be willing to sell their birthright for a mess of pottage. This birthright, for example, let's pay for it now and let somebody pay it back, you know. Let's borrow the money now and let somebody pay it back down the road somewhere. Our national debt has gone to trillions upon trillions upon trillions of dollars.
Let somebody else pay for it, sure. This is the attitude of Esau. You know, he came in hungry one day. Jacob had stewed up a big, probably a wonderful tasting stew, and he walked in the house and smelled that and said, wow, great stuff. And he said to Jacob, you know, feed me, I'm dying of starvation. And Jacob said, well, sell me this day thy birthright. That's in Genesis 25:31. Sell me this day thy birthright. Esau's reaction, no problem. I'll give you my birthright for that.
Yeah.
Worry about it later. This is the whole attitude. And this proves, of course, as this clause appears in George Washington's speech, that he was familiar with a major Bible theme. He was drawing a reference here, picturing how America might end her days.
Yes, and Americans are so wrapped up in drugs today and so delighted with the little zip or buzz that it'll give a person that they're willing to sell their birthright in order to get these drugs. What can I say? I mean, America has gone so far down the road to God's judgment, it's pathetic. It is pathetic, and I say it publicly, it is pathetic that America should be so immoral as Americans are today. Drugs, big government, look at big government, Gary, and bureaucracies and welfare and Medicare, and all this has just come because nobody wants to really stand on their own 2 feet. They want government to take care of them.
And you know, this is a human tendency, and I'm sure George Washington knew this, that goes all the way back and is illustrated many times in the Old Testament. Judges 21:25, referring to the state of the people, says, in those days there was no king in Israel. Every man did that which was right in his own eyes. J.R., this is our problem today.
The me society.
The me society. Me, self, mine, self-realization, self-actualization. I'm going to do what's right in my own eyes, and everything will work out just fine.
The dumbing down of American society by Hollywood, by politicians, by the news media, by television is going to create the judgment of God upon America. Look at all the gambling casinos that are cropping up everywhere, and lotteries and states. I mean, everybody wants something for nothing. Nobody's willing to trust God for it.
Talk about selling your birthright for a mess of pottage. Gambling and state lotteries. That's the perfect illustration, believe me.
Then George Washington said, in short, until they have been found incapable of governing themselves and ripe for a master. Incapable of governing themselves. Boy, have we ever arrived there, Gary.
And you know, this master is going to come along, and he's going to be the most emotionally pleasing man. He'll have a way of phrasing things, you know. He'll be able to say, I'm going to take care of you. Just trust me. Yeah. And the people will say, oh, he's come at last. He's going to take care of us.
Yeah.
And the Bible has a name for that man.
The Antichrist.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the V-chip for just a moment. Just give you an example of how far down the road Americans have come. Yeah. Our politicians in Washington say, what we need is a V-chip on the television set to help you to program your television set so your children will not watch sex and violence on television at night. Do you know what they're saying? What they're really saying is, Hollywood, who's made all those filthy movies back during the 1960s and 70s and 80s, now want to show them on television. That's what they're saying.
Sure.
And this is a thinly veiled way of saying, I'm so moral that we're going to help you to keep your television set clean because we're fixing to pour the most awful garbage on it you've ever seen in your entire life.
You know, the Time magazine for February 19th of this year makes that precise point. The V-chip, it says, allows parents to automatically block out programs they don't want their kids to see. But it also says, using the V-chip, producers might find themselves liberated, able to produce even more so-called adult fare, secure in the knowledge that children will be shielded from it. You're absolutely right. This is just a thinly veiled attempt to promote more erotic, more pornographic programs, foul language, etc.
Yeah. What kind of stupid politicians do we have in Washington, D.C.? They think they can get away with it? Well, I'm afraid they will, because Americans have been so dumbed down that they do not have any virtue left. They have no morals left. They have done exactly what George Washington said would happen, and in that day America will lose its freedom. It will lose its sovereignty and will be ruled by a foreign power. Today, our government is even turning over our military to the United Nations military. We are very far down that road to oblivion.
You know, Isaiah says in chapter 5, verse 20, "Woe unto them that call evil good, and good evil, that put darkness for light, and light for darkness, that put bitter for sweet, and sweet for bitter." J.R., we've done all of that.
Yeah.
And George Washington said he prayed that that day would never come.
But it has come, and we're soon to see the rise of a master, wicked, evil master.